All right. So, hello, welcome to my session. I'm going to be talking about uh, ETL tools and specifically Azure Data Factory, being Microsoft's primary supplement into this career field or into this technology area of big data and moving data around. Of course, we always want to thank all the sponsors for conferences like this. If it weren't for sponsors, these kinds of conferences just wouldn't exist. So. A little bit about me. I'm Barrett Blake. I am a Microsoft MVP, specifically for Power Automate in the business applications area. But I also do a lot with data, as as with this session, and also with .NET space in those areas, and try to be fairly involved in the community. And you can see a bunch more stuff about me there. I won't go into all that, but it's a little bit about me. So let's start by talking about data. We've got data. It comes from all over the place. You get stuff as you're working, with your day-to-day jobs. You're working with data from everywhere. You've got files, you've got databases, you've got customers who are providing various data. You've got various internal systems that are tracking things, and you have to move stuff back and forth. You've got people doing manual data entry or automated data entry, and you're also connecting to a bunch of external APIs typically, from things like Salesforce or Oracle or whatever it might be, whatever these external systems that you might work with as a part of your day to day. So you've got data that it's all over the place. It's none of it's structured the same way. None of it is really all that compatible with each system. So you have to come up with ways of moving that data back and forth so you can do, effective uh, manipulation and tracking and things like that. And that's where ETL tools come into play. ETL stands for extract, transform, and load. So with an ETL process, you have data that's extracted from a source location. It goes through a tool of some sort where that data is transformed, it is manipulated, it is cleaned up, any number of things that you might do with that data before you finally send that data to its final destination. And there is a kind of a corollary to that called ELT, which is not used quite as much, but as it's where you're doing the extraction, you're doing the load into the destination system, and then you're doing any transformation that needs to be done on the destination system. So if a lot of these destination systems, be it SQL Server, Oracle, or whatever it is that you're working with, a lot of those can do some data manipulation. A lot of those have various inputs and outputs that work with them. So what's the point of having an ETL tool? Do you really need an ETL tool? Something that's specifically dedicated to that? And most of the time, really the answer is yes, you actually do. As far as the differences between the two, you've got this tool that does a lot of data transformation for you, and that's its basic thing. But it also can make things like compliance with HIPAA regulations, with GDPR, with all these other government regulations that are out there across the world. It makes it far easier to work with those. It makes it allows you to have a lot better data quality. You can massage the data, you can manipulate it however you need to, you can format it in the structure that needs to be in a far easier process than you can in most of these destination systems. A lot of the ETL tools that nowadays also have a lot of improved automation and AI integration, and that's continuing to grow and become more of a thing, obviously, with everything being AI these days. These ETL tools are a lot more scalable and adaptable than most of the destination systems will be. And most of these tools will have far greater integration. For instance, SQL Server, you can connect to 2 or 3 different types of data sources, 3 or 4 maybe at best. But a tool like Data Factory has dozens of different connections, different things that you can connect to. And so, these tools make your life a whole lot easier. And yeah, it does require a little bit more maintenance. It does require a dedicated system most of the time. But that expenditure, that expense that you put into it is generally very worthwhile. It's worth the time investment up front so that your long-term time, you're saving a lot of time that way. And most of these systems, are designed to work with big data. You've got data coming from all over the place, as I talked about earlier, and you need to use it in a variety of different ways. It might be creating a product recommendation system. You go into Amazon, and half of the page that you're on there is, it's things like, you bought this, or you liked this, or you looked at this. You might also like these things over here. Um, it's also, very useful for marketing. Marketing is expensive, and it takes a lot of time and investment to market your products to other people. Well, by collecting all this data and putting it all together, you're able to look at your customer base or potential customer base and say, okay, this group of people over here are far more likely to buy from me in the next 6 months. So I'm going to target my marketing towards those kinds of people. There's a lot of ERP and warehouse management systems out there, like Dynamics or Salesforce or any of those other kinds of things. And these tools, ETL tools, make it far easier to move that data back and forth between these systems, which aren't really designed out of the box to talk to each other. They also make it far easier to format and structure to put it into a data warehouse or a data lake. I worked on a project once around setting up a MicroStrategy data warehouse, and we were writing all these custom imports for various data. We could have done it in a third of the time with an ETL tool if we'd used one. But there's lesson learned from that. There's HR systems, PeopleSoft, SAP, Active Directory. One of the projects that I worked on at my previous employer was working on taking data out of PeopleSoft when an employee would be hired, and taking that data, export from that. I would format it and restructure it, run it through a couple of Azure functions, and then automatically use that data to automatically generate, the Active Directory entries, to automatically provision their accounts, and all these other things that, would require a dozen different support tickets to a dozen different people in IT support and all over the place. And I could do it, it would take hours or days, sometimes weeks, to onboard somebody. And the system that I created was able to do it in, half an hour at most. And of course, you've got this data coming in from all over the place. You need to analyze it in various ways. It might be log data, like application insights, or, bug tracking tool that you're using, or whatever it might be. You tend to need to collate all that data, pull it all together, and figure out where it is that you need to focus your development efforts. And these kinds of tools help you gather all that data together so that you can do that. Now, as far as the tools that are out there, there are tons of them. There's a few that I'm showing here. This isn't even, I wouldn't even call this a partial list. It doesn't even come close to that, because there are literally hundreds of tools out there. Some of them are dedicated, some are standalone apps, some are server-based, some are cloud-based, some of them are part of other packages, whatever it might be. But at their core, they all work in the same general fashion. They provide a bunch of different connection types so that you can take data from one system, you can massage that data or structure it, and then push it into another system so that you can actually do something with that formatted data. And that's really what all these tools provide, is that that ability to take that data and easily move it around and manipulate it. And for, like I said, for Microsoft offering, it's Azure Data Factory is the primary offering that they have these days, and it is cloud-based, and it is available either as a standalone application or as a part of Microsoft Fabric. You can run it either way. The feature parity is pretty close between the two different versions. There's really almost nothing that you can't do in one that you can't do in the other. It's just the one that's in Fabric is a little bit better integrated into doing things like data lakes and whatnot. That Fabric is pushing towards being a part. So that's really it for the slides. I don't like to spend a whole lot of time on slides. So let's start getting into some hands-on looking here. And let me just switch screens. All right. So I should be able to see my browser now. So as I mentioned, Data Factory is part of Azure. It's a cloud-based tool. And if you go into your Azure portal and you'll have a resource that's called a Data Factory. And right now the current version is V2 for the standalone. And you create one of those resources in Azure. And when you open it up, you're presented with this particular screen here where you can get some basic stats like you would on any Azure. But everything you're going to do is going to be inside Azure Data Factory Studio. And when you open it up, you'll see this button here, and you just go ahead and click on that, and that opens up your instance of Data Factory. And of course, like everything, Azure, it's usage based. So the more you use it, the more it costs you, and so forth. So when you arrive, or you land on this landing page. You can see recent things that you've worked with. You have a bunch of templates, as with a lot of Azure products. There's a bunch of templates that you can use as a starting point. And we can take a look at those just really fast here. So just to give you an idea of some of the things that you can do bulk copies from a database. You can copy from files to a database. You can move things between file stores. You can call REST HTTP endpoint and get data from that or push data to it. There's any number of things that you can do here, and this is just a few examples. There's also a lot of, if you do anything with like Databricks or any of that kind of stuff, there's a lot of integration with that in Data Factory. And you can just see some more examples there, just the general kind of stuff that you can do with Data Factory. And so let's go back here. Whoops, cancel. And then you'll have a couple of things here, and I'll go through each of these a little bit. You have the author tab, which is where you will do most of your work at. This is, where you look at the things that you're working with. What they call pipelines and data flows are the two big things. I'll come back to that in a minute. There's the monitor tab where you can look at things that have been running. I haven't run anything the last day or two. Like a lot of the stuff, it keeps data for about 30 days. And if I look back here, why is that? Oh, sorry. 30 days. Debug. There we go. So you've got two different tabs here on this. So you've got the triggered. That's the ones that run. That's basically your production environment. And then you've got debug where you've been running from your test environment things. So if I go back 30 days, you can see some previous runs that I've done as part of testing with this particular environment that I use for demos here. For each of those, you can see when it ran, when it ended, how long it ran for, whether or not it succeeded or was canceled, or if there's an error, you'll see the error status here. And you can click into that and you can see things. You'll see what it was triggered by and an ID and whatnot. If there were parameters that were passed in, you can see that as well. And for each of those, you can click into it and you can actually see a breakdown of what that actual run did. If there were multiple steps, you would see them listed here. This one's not a great example. Let me look at this one here. There we go. There's one with a bunch of different steps to it. And as you can see, you'll see down through here, you'll see things like where data came from, the inputs, and you see us reading data from a file in this particular case. And I'll talk more about the stuff as we go through the various steps here. Here. You can see the number of records that it did, the amount of data that it did. You can see it in like a summarized version here that gives you a good graphical version. So here, it read 420 kilobytes of data. It wrote 728 kilobytes of data. It wrote 32,700 rows. Read from one file, read 32,700 rows from that. So you can see a good breakdown of the various things that it did. And these are all in execution order in reverse. So the newest step is at the top and goes down through the older steps here. You can see it did a bunch of copy days, and I'll talk about those as I go through here. If a pipeline was run by a trigger, then you can look at those here. I don't have any of that in here at the moment. There is change data capture, which is an integration with SQL Server. If you have change data capture integrated or turned on your SQL Server instance, you can trigger pipelines to run based on data that's changed in your SQL Server. If you are connecting to, say, something like SQL Server on-prem, you have to use what's called an integration runtime, which is basically a runtime that you install on a local machine on your network inside your on-prem network in order to connect those. And you also have one default integration runtime that runs in the cloud. This is the one that by default, this will run all of your pipelines and data flows and anything that you're doing there. If you have it, you can also add additional ones. So if, for instance, it obviously this only has so much capacity, and if you need to do work, a lot more work with that, then you can add other ones with for additional costs. And then like the self-hosted ones, those are the ones that be on like on-prem. You can see the Azure instances. And this, like I said, is the one that you get default out of the box that comes with your account. You can also manage a bunch of things. There are various connections that you'll have. If you've got a Data Fabric instance or a Microsoft Fabric instance, you can connect it to that as well. You can one of the things that is kind of still in preview is Git integration. So your pipelines, as you work with them, and I'll show you an example of this in a little bit, are basically stored as JSON text, so that you can store those into either GitHub or Azure DevOps, either one you can use as a data store. Right now, it's still kind of early days. I mean, even though it's been in there for a year or two, it's still early on, so you can't really do like, reversions or anything like that. You can't undo migrations and things like that, but it does store them in there. As far as triggers, you can trigger a pipeline in any number of ways. Mostly, it's either on a timer or with a what they call a I'm having a brain cramp here. When you have a file change, so for instance, you can attach it to your Azure Blob storage, and if a file gets dropped or a file changes, then it can trigger that way as well. Those are the two main ones. You can also set up external triggers, so you can run it from like a Azure function or by hitting an HTTP endpoint as well. If you want to have some sort of external system that kicks off your data flows for you. So that's kind of a little bit of what's through here. I mean, you can set up some global parameters and things like that, but I won't go delving into those. Let's go back to the author section. I just want to show you some of these things here. So if, with templates, you can create, I showed you those templates earlier, you can import those, or you can also create your own templates if you have something that you want to set up a bunch of different pipelines based on that. You can set up your own templates. You can export templates for other people to use. You can import templates that other people have sent you, and those would show up here if you had any of that. Data sets are your source and destination points. So each of these represents a data source of some sort. So for instance, this one here is a CSV file in my Azure Blob storage. This one here is a database table in my Azure SQL instance, and so on and so forth. It might, like I say, it might be an HTTP endpoint, it might be anything of that. So I'll just show you some of the examples of things that you can connect to with Data Factory. For instance, Amazon RDS, Redshift, S3 buckets, Azure Blob storage, Azure Table storage, data lakes, SQL Server. You can do either Azure SQL Server or on-prem SQL Server. Dynamics, either Dynamics ERP or CRM, either one. You can hit FTP sites. For instance, when I was working on a project with migrating a bunch of warehouse management information between their warehouse management system and their ERP system, we were doing a lot of moving files back and forth with FTP, and Data Factory makes it really easy to do that. Google Cloud Storage, for instance, HTTP endpoints you can connect to, HubSpot. So you can see a bunch of different stuff here that pretty much any mainstream database system has a connector for it. A lot of custom systems, and then of course, any HTTP endpoints, so that you can connect to pretty much anything that can connect to the web, and a lot of on-prem stuff as well. So if you were to create a new data set, most of those set up the same way. You just tell it how to connect to the information and give it a name, and that's pretty much it. It's pretty easy to set up. Most of the other work that you'll do will either be a pipeline or a data flow. So pipelines are generally fairly simple. For instance, this one here is just a single step that copies data from uh, one data set to another data set. It can do a little bit of manipulation, but there's not a whole lot available to you with a copy data step or simple pipelines. And each one of these steps will have a source and a sink for most of the stuff. Source obviously is where the data is coming from. Sink is where you're sending the data to. And really, the only customization you can do with this, simple pipeline copy step is you can add like some additional columns if you want to add like a calculated column of some sort. Let me see if this other one has an example of that. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so if I see, you can see the source here. I've added an additional column for the year. In this particular case, this pipeline is getting a list of files from a folder in blob storage. It's running a script to truncate the database table it's going to copy to. And then for each of the files that it got from this list, it's doing this copy step, saying I'm going to copy from the file to my Azure SQL table. And for each of those, because each of the files is named for a specific year of data that it's getting, I've added the year column so that it knows, so that when it goes into the database table, it's got another field here that will tell it what year that file came from or what year that data came from. So you can either, you can do static values, you can do dynamic values. There's a number of functions that you have access to that will let you work with stuff. So if I go into functions, you can see I can do a lot of stuff with collections. I can convert data between various types, from strings to numbers to, binary to base 64 and back and forth and so forth. It can work a lot with dates, especially with doing adding, subtracting of dates. You can do a lot of that fairly easily. Various date pieces. There's a lot of, the standard greater than, less than, equals kind of stuff as far as comparisons. There are a bunch of math functions that you can do. If you need to do, excuse me, min, max, simple arithmetic. You would love to be able to just say, I can do, equals 3 plus 3, but you can't do it that way. It has to be written a specific way. So you'd say like add 3 comma 3, and you have to write them that way. It gets a little tricky, but if you're used to doing, you get used to it after a little bit, and it works pretty well. And then of course the normal string functions here with concatenation. You can do parsing. You can do substrings. Converting case, trimming, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of options that you have there to work with. You can also set up variables within each of these, or you can pass in parameters from an external source. So a variable, basically the difference between the two is parameters passed in, and a variable is something that you define strictly within this particular pipeline. So that's a simple example here of those. A couple of things to remember when you're working with anything in Data Factory. Nothing gets saved until so there's no autosave, so nothing gets saved until you do a save. You cannot save anything that has bugs in it. So if I were to do like a validate, if I had an error here, it wouldn't let me save, but I don't have any errors at the moment. So if I were to come back in to say like this, and oops, go back in here to this. I'm going to change this just so it has an error in it. So you can see it shows you the error there, but also if I were to click validate, it'll tell me, I please use math functions rather than symbol operators kind of thing. So until you've solved all of your errors, you cannot actually save any of the work that you're doing. So if I go in here and save now, it'll ask you for a commit message, and it'll generate one automatically for you, or you can type in your own there. If I want to run a pipeline, so I would just, if I want to run it locally, then I can just click debug and it would run it there. So for instance, if I go back here to this basic one here and just hit debug, And you can see it queues it up. It basically has to connect to that integrated runtime that I showed you earlier and say, okay, let's run this pipeline here. And this in progress output down here at the bottom, it updates about once every 5 to 10 seconds. It depends on what it's doing. Or, if you're impatient, you can just click the refresh button. Um, so you can hear it's succeeded. You can see, read one file, copied 14 rows, or wrote 14 rows. And that was it for that one. Weren't any errors. Um, and it will show you the runtime that it ran with as well. So there's that. So that's basically a simple pipeline. There's a lot of stuff that you can do within a pipeline. So I'll show you some of the activities here. So there's copy data. Well, actually, let me talk about data flows just a little bit first. So I mentioned that pipelines were for simple processes. It's for simple manipulation, moving data from one place to another. If you need to do anything more complex, like aggregation, or say for instance you have data coming from several different files, and this is really small, so let me zoom in here. So let's say I've got, in this particular case, I've got these 3 different files of flight information for air travel, and I need to collate that data together into a single output. Well, it's not something that you can do with a normal pipeline. You would have to create a data flow for that, and this lets you do a lot more complex stuff. So in this particular case, you would define your 3 data sources here. So I've got an airlines file, an airports file, and a flights file. And then I've added a filter to my flights file. So I'm saying for this particular thing, I only want to do things where the destination airport is CMH, which is Columbus, Ohio's airport, or the origin airport is CMH. So it'll filter that data based on that. So that's one of the things you can do with this data. You can filter it in all sorts of different ways. You can manipulate it in other ways, and I'll show you here some of those examples in a second. And then I'm joining this file information together. So first I'm joining it to the airlines file. So I'm saying, this particular set of data, go down here. So I'm joining it on the airline record, or the airline column in the flights file, and I'm connecting that to, or joining that to the IATA code in the airlines file, because in this one, they're not named the same thing. In this particular case, the airline is in the IATA code in the flights file. And you can do joins just like you would in SQL. So you can do a full outer join, you can do inner joins, left, right, and custom. So it's very easy that way, and it doesn't even have to be SQL data. So for instance, this is 2 rows of CSV, or 2 CSV files that have a bunch of data in it. So it's very easy to join that data together that way. And then I'm doing a select out of that. So I'm saying, okay, from those 2 joined files, I want to select the following fields. And as part of a select, you can rename things. And the reason that I'm doing it this way is that there are a lot of fields in these 3 files that actually have the same names. And if you don't rename them as part of a select in the output, Data Factory will sometimes get confused, and it'll throw errors because it doesn't know which version or which one of those 2 different columns have the same name to use. So in this particular case, so I've got the flights file here. I'm just because I've already got a column called airline in the airlines file, I want to rename this one as flights airline because that's the one's coming out of the flights file. So it's fairly easy to do that. You can also do some customization with things. For instance, I showed you where you could add columns and things like that. You can do that as well. You can also say, okay, if I don't need a particular field, so maybe I don't need, I don't care about taxi out or wheels off or whatever that data represents. So I can just check on those 2 and click delete. And those are removed from my output. So it makes it really easy to manipulate things. So if you want to hide things like PII information, get rid of that, and not have that as part of your output, then it's very easy to do that through these data flows. And then I've got examples here where I'm joining to the same airports file twice because I need to have a departure airport and a destination airport. And because those are the same thing, again, I'm doing the select, where I'm renaming things. So, here I've got destination airport, scheduled arrival, or sorry, not scheduled arrival. Where's the other things? Okay, down here. So I've got the IATA code for the departure airport, the IATA code for the name for the departure airport. And again, the same thing here. And then I've got my, for the arrival. And then I've got my, final select here. So my final output here, uh, I can show a bunch of different data here and decide what I'm going to do. And then one thing that I haven't added to this is I need to add an output. So I could run this and I can see a data preview here. Actually, I didn't do that. No, actually, take a couple minutes to spin up. So that's another thing with data flows is it doesn't run off the integration runtime by default. You have to spin up a special instance of it just for data flow debugging. So that's one of the things when you come in here to a data flow, you'll generally have to turn that on, and it takes 5 to 10 minutes. So I won't wait for it to do that. But if I was to, want to do something else with the data, so maybe I want to join it to another thing. Maybe I want to do splits. So maybe I want to have output files by airport, so I can see a different file generated or, file or database table or whatever it might be. If I want each of those to go to a different airport or a different file, sorry, a different destination, then I could do a conditional split and say, okay, do a split on the departure airport, do a split on the arrival airport, do a split on the airline. So maybe I want to get all the things for Delta or United or, Air Canada or whatever it might be. You can use this to slice up your information any different way that you want to. You can do, check for existence of it. So if you want to do kind of like if exists kind of things that you would do in SQL, you can do unions. If you have a bunch of different outputs, you can union them together from various things. So maybe you want 3 sets of files and each of those have 3 different outputs, and then you want to union those all together. You can do that very easily. You can do aggregations, you can do pivot tables. There's all kinds of different stuff that you can do. You can flatten, you can stringify if you want to send it all to like a JSON destination. Maybe, you want to output everything into a document DB like, Cosmos or something like that. Then you can do that very easily here as well. And then, like I say, I haven't added a sync, but, the sync would be a destination. So if I want to just send it all to a single destination, I could do that sync there. Or, if I'm like doing a split here, conditional split into 3 different ones, then I would have 3 different syncs. So data flows are for those more complex situations where it's not a one source, one destination kind of thing. So let's go back to the pipelines here for a second. Just show you a couple more things around that. So let's say, you can do a little bit more complicated stuff. There's a lot of, actually, let me walk through the other stuff here. I didn't get back to that. So from a pipeline, you can call a data flow and run a data flow, but you can't do it vice versa. So you cannot call a pipeline from a data flow. You can call a data flow from a pipeline. If you're working with Synapse, then you can connect to notebooks and Spark jobs and things like that. Azure Data Explorer has a good integration with that as well. Azure Functions. So if you want to call a function, pass in data to it and get a result back, you can do that as well. Or if you just want to kick off an Azure function, you can do that from a pipeline. Batch services is just basically for custom work. You can create something that will run as a batch service for you. Databricks, I mentioned that earlier. So if notebooks, if you have a Python notebook, any of that kind of stuff that you can do in Databricks, you can call it all from Data Factory. You can do USQL queries against Data Lake. So that makes it, that's a good way to get data from there. And then there's a bunch of general functions here. So, you can work with variables. Delete is for deleting files. You can have a pipeline call another pipeline. So there's a limit of something like 50, I think, activities in a pipeline. So if you need to do something more complex than that, or maybe you want to refactor out some steps so that you can have several different pipelines calling the same, uniform logic, then you can have pipelines that call other pipelines as well. If you want to manually fail a pipeline, you can do that. So maybe you basically want to say, if there's a set of conditions, I don't want to trigger an automatic, or that doesn't actually trigger an automatic failure. Maybe I just, if maybe a file's missing or something like that, then I can, or say if I'm looking for files on a regular schedule and there aren't any files, then I can fail out or whatever it might be. and that will report a message back to the management or to the monitoring stuff here. I did fail to mention too, you can set up with monitoring, you can set up things like text alerts and email alerts as well. SSIS packages, so you can either execute an SSIS package in on a SQL server somewhere. Get metadata, that's for getting information about files and directories. Looking up, so if you have any set of data, you can do a lookup to look into that data that you've got. So maybe use metadata to get the list of files in a folder. You can use a lookup to get information about a specific file that you found there. You can call stored procedures on a database server. You can run a raw SQL script of some kind. Write your own SQL. Working with variables again. Web and webhooks. So these are the two actions or activities that you'll use to call out to an HTTP endpoint of some kind. And basically the difference between the two is web is fire and forget. So it'll call that endpoint. It won't wait for a response. It'll just go on about its way. Webhook will actually wait for a response to come back. So that's basically the difference between those two there. And then if you can have a wait step. So if you need to manually wait for something, so maybe you trigger something, maybe that kicks off like an Azure function that's going to go do some work somewhere, and you need for it to wait for like a half an hour to make sure that the results are all processed on the other end. You can add a wait step for any amount of time. I think you can wait up to like 30 days even if you need to. So that's a bunch of stuff that you can do there. You can do HD Insight. I've never done anything with any of these, so I couldn't really speak to those. If you need to do looping or conditionals, it's got the ability to do that as well. For instance, I showed you in is it this one? No, it wasn't that one. This one here. So this one's a for each loop. So basically for each of the files that it finds in here, it's going to execute the stuff inside of here once. That. I've not done anything with machine learning, but if you have a machine learning pipeline set up, you can kick that off here. And then Power Query. So anything that you can do with Power Query, you can call it from Data Factory. So it's pretty straightforward there. All right, let's see here. So I was going to show you a couple other things. So you can get. I mean, I call this the pipelines the simple process, but you can get fairly complex in it. As far as doing something, you can just drag and drop, and then for each activity that's on here, you have 4 possible results. So you can either say, if this activity was skipped, then do something else. If it was successful, then you can do something else. As you can see here, for each of these 2 steps, it's the on success. If it fails, you can do something. So maybe if it's successful, do one thing. If it fails, you can do another thing. So maybe if it fails, I want to do this data flow, but if it's on success, then I want to go to that kind of thing. You can have multiple predecessors for a particular step. And this, for instance, in this case, the for each step will not run until all of its predecessors are successful. So in this particular case here, if copy data failed, then the for each will never trigger because it requires that both of its inputs be successful. So you can do things that way. And then you can say, no matter what, I want you to do something. That's the on completion. So if I were to say, change this to on completion, then it would say that no matter what, the next step, one of the next steps is the for each. So regardless of whether this was successful or not, it qualifies for triggering for each as well. So you can get fairly complicated. You can have things. You can do something like that. So saying not only does copy data have to be completed, but the data flow that comes from here has to be successful. So you can get fairly complicated in the activities that you do here. But like I say, it's the simpler thing because it's always, for each of that, it's always one in, one out kind of thing for these copy data steps. And other than that, there's really not a whole lot else you can do as far as moving data back and forth. Although you can do, like I say, you can do things like calling Azure functions or something like that. And you can have multiple outputs as well. So Say if I want to call an Azure function, and it'll do both of those on success, you just drag and drop. Uh, all right. Let's see here. I think that really covers about everything that I wanted to show you. Does anybody have any questions or anything? I guess I can go ahead and open it up to questions.